Good start. Good evening, members, and welcome to the Environment and Enforcement Scrutiny Committee. So first of all, number one on the agenda, we have any apologies for absences. Perfect. Number two, any declarations of interest. Essex County Council, I will put on block for Councillor Smith. Apologies, and Councillor Reid, apologies. Agenda item number 3, minutes of the last meeting. So does everyone confirm the minutes of the last meeting to be correct? So we'll take a vote on that. All those in favour? Perfect. All those against? And any abstentions? Perfect. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 4, the corporate enforcement policy, which I will hand over to Councillor Smith. Oh, sorry, apologies. Due to, we're moving a bit of the agenda around this evening. So first of all, on the agenda, item number 6 will be item number 4. So over to Councillor Kerry Smith to talk about dog fouling.
Better than that, scooters. But I wish I could deal with them in the same manner. I'll read to you what my officer Julie Lung has prepared because it's got the statistics and numbers in. I'll add a bit and then take any questions members have. Right. The borough-wide Public Space Protection Order, originally introduced on the 1st of April 2022, continues to support efforts to address behaviours that negatively impact residents' quality of life. Following Cabinet approval, the Public Space Protection Order was extended in March 2025 for a further 3 years until March 28. The extension has approved 2 new prohibitions. 1, the illegal use of motor vehicles including e-scooters, and 2, the use of amplifiers within the town centre. To support enforcement of prohibitions, updated signage was installed in June 25, replacing the previous signs in accordance with statutory requirements. An initial period of education and warnings was implemented to ensure that the prohibition on e-scooters was clearly understood by the public. This approach, delivered in partnership with the police, has since transitioned into firmer enforcement as awareness has increased. Recently, Section 59 warning signage was produced and distributed for display in local shops. These signs act as a clear warning to individuals using motor vehicles illegally within the restricted areas, enabling the police to seize vehicles where breaches are witnessed. This measure has continued to increase in seizures and correspondence decrease in fixed penalty notices issued in recent months, demonstrating the deterrent effect. Enforcement activity data today, August 2025, 5 fixed penalty notices issued. September 25, 17 fixed penalty notices issued, 12 e-scooters seized. Last October to the 10th of November, 25 e-scooters seized, 2 fixed penalty notices issued. So that's the report from my officer that I've presented tonight. But the basis about this was, and I don't want to seem political because that's not what I'm here for tonight, that trial of e-scooters, then what were orange and then went mint green, has created a bad mindset, I think, that get your own scooters. Halfords quite happily sell them to people. They don't make it clear that they're illegal in public domain. And if you're caught using one, it is the same as joyriding a car without tax and insurance. And if that young person has a provisional driving licence, they could face the same penalty. So it's quite severe if you're caught by the police and if you find a police officer willing to throw the book. So in a way, our actions tonight is to deal with that. But when we had the trial of those e-scooters, we saw an explosion of privately owned scooters. Now, yeah, if you buy the ones from proper places like Halfords, they're a nuisance. If you're buying these illegal ones, these other illegal ones that you see cheap on the internet, you quite often see properties catching light because the battery catches light. That means a fire engine and its crew has to be deployed to put out that fire. And because it's a lithium-based battery, you can't just treat it like a chip pan fire. They take sometimes a lot of skills when that fire crew could be needed for something more important. So this is why, where we have this public space protection order in Basildon Town Centre and other town centres, but we're focused mostly on Basildon, because if we can send a message out, your scooter's going to get seized or you're going to get fined, it enables us, once we've cured the problem or resolved the problem to a degree in Basildon, we can go to other town centres where there's a problem. But Basildon is the worst by far when we came into this problem in the summer. So obviously the trial e-scooters are all blissfully packed up on a nice van. They was taken to Harlow and they're very welcome to them. Very welcome, and I hope they have a positive experience. But as I say, we are dealing with the illegal ones being used in the town centre, and it's not the case being mean or horrible, but they travel at quite a speed. We have people of all different mobilities who use our town centre, and one of these scooters flying past you without any due care or attention can lead to accidents, people ending up in A&E, and we want to send a message out that we support businesses. But if people don't feel comfortable shopping in our town centre, how does that encourage businesses? So I'll leave it there and take any questions from members, and I'll await your replies.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Open to questions. Councillor Mordecai.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you very much for the update, Councillor Smith. These scooters that we're seizing, are they actually being destroyed?
They're taken and physically destroyed, and I have said to the police they should be seized, crushed and recycled.
Thank you. And in relation to the planned rollout for like Wickford and Billericay, yeah, when do you plan to roll that out? Because I do applaud you for what you're trying to do. I won't deny that.
What we're going to do is, where Basildon is the worst one, we're learning from it, and I don't physically see a problem in the new year. I'll liaise with my officer Julie Long. Yeah. When is the best time to deploy? I think with other towns in the borough, including Pitsea, sadly Langdon doesn't have an high street at the moment. I know Councillor Webb and his colleagues are working hard to get the Lidls and everything else. So at the moment, Langdon's off the radar. But we'll start off as we did in Basildon Town Centre. We give everyone fair warning, because how many people have got a scooter for Christmas or their birthday, and if they've bought it from somewhere reputable like Alfred's, they're not cheap, and then we come along and go, wallop, that's crushed. So we want to give people fair warning. Once they've had fair warning, I'm very sure we'd obviously, could we go into the actual details, Julie? Because do we need a police officer to stop? Could you go through that part about, say for example, Jules Jeffries is riding around on his Christmas scooter through Wickford, what would happen?
Certainly, yeah, need the high vis, I'm sure. Ultimately, the public space protection order variations are they're evidence-based. So when there's sufficient evidence to request a variation, we go out to public consultation, and then we use that consultation to implement changes. What I would say is there are various prohibitions which include the use of motorised vehicles in various parks across the borough also. What it's probably useful to do, Chair, with your permission, is to share all the regulations that go alongside the public space protection order. But ultimately, it's very much led by evidence. So it's still illegal to be riding an e-scooter. However, if you're in the public space protection order, we can give council officers delegated authority to tackle that also. They're not able to seize, but they are able to issue fixed penalty notices for the breach of the public space protection order.
Amazing. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with Councillor Smith, but I do think that it's going to hit some people who use them illegally but sensibly. I mean, I see several from my bedroom window looking up Travers Way. I see nurses using them instead of using cars. So, you know, it's going to inhibit people like that who are using them in a sensible way. But after saying that, when I was coming to this meeting tonight, somebody went straight across Broadmain in front of me on a scooter, and the only way I saw this person was because he had 2 yellow stripes on his sleeve, which the headlights, otherwise he was, the scooter was black, he was dressed totally from head to foot in black. And luckily the car behind me wasn't too close to him, because I had to almost do an emergency stop, otherwise I would have hit this person. And I think this is the danger. I mean, we've already had 2 children in Pitsea that did get knocked down. And so, you know, something definitely has to be done. We can't continue in the way that we are, but I don't quite know how you... It's sort of trying, maybe there should be some... You have to have a licence to actually use them, so that at least adults that are using them for work purposes can still, like a motorcycle or something, that you have to have some kind of, but that would prohibit young people who are just hairing around and scaring the life out of people then using them. And, you know, then if they are seized, they deserve to be taken away and crushed.
Well, as for your last point, Councillor Reid, that will require an act of Parliament and Parliament to change legislation. We are not going round the states like fabled white-capped police officers and going, oh, well, we know the nurses always come past this pathway and no one ever complains about them, but we're bound to get 10 new scooters and extra fines. We're not doing that. Where they're working in the footprint of Basildon Town Centre, I think whatever reason, whatever thing you try and justify, using a scooter in a pedestrianised area does not wash. You wouldn't take your car through, you don't want to take an e-bike through. But I do appreciate what you said, Councillor Reid, but we're just focused on town centres, and as Julie Long has said, it's evidence-based. We're not like the fabled white-cap traffic officers hiding in the bushes looking to nick people. We just want our town centres being pedestrian friendly. And if someone works as a nurse, works as a postie, whatever profession, uses their common sense, rides safely, we're not going to be going out looking for them. But if they're going to go at speed through a town centre when people are trying to do their shop, they're fair game to us. I hope that clears that point up. But I would always say people shouldn't use these scooters. They are illegal, and if you are caught by the police, it's the same as being nicked for joyriding without a licence. Sorry, Julie.
No, not. Thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to add, with regards to your point concerning people using them safely, I think our concern is that it's very difficult to use an e-scooter safely, actually, not only to the individual that's using the scooter, but pedestrians alike. And what I would say is, particularly within the town centre, there were a lot of delivery drivers that were using the e-scooters to collect Just Eat orders and that sort of thing. And what we did do is gave them a notice period to let them know that this was going to be coming into force, because we did appreciate the fact that they were using them as part of their employment, but ultimately it was having such a negative effect on other pedestrians within the town centre. But we did use a period of time of education. We didn't just go out and seize the scooters, issue fines. We certainly introduced a period of education alongside Councillor Smith. Thank you.
Is there any other questions for Councillor Smith? Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thanks, Jim. Just following on from what my colleague Councillor Mordecai said. So in terms of the rollout to the other towns, I guess we're sort of doing that on the data-led basis. So when you're saying the new year, do we sort of roughly know when? Because I know sometimes when people have hit near misses with e-scooters, they'll sort of be in the shock and then not report it. So sometimes we're missing the full picture. So I just thought, how do we actually adjust for that? Because sometimes it's the same with antisocial behaviour. It's not always reported, but we still know that there's a problem.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Councillor. We do have, there are teams working within Wickford High Street, for example, now, bid rangers, other officers within the High Street, and we will link in with them to attain statistics with regards to there being issues. Also, any reports that we get via our community safety team and our colleagues at Essex Police. So we do work very closely in that regard. But it's very important that when we introduce a prohibition that we enforce it, because what we don't want to do is introduce too many prohibitions and then they're not being enforced appropriately. And I think we've proven within Basildon Town Centre that we're taking robust action. We had a period of education and now we're taking robust action against these individuals, and we will continue to do that across the borough, particularly where the evidence supports that. Hope that offers you some reassurance, Councillor.
And is there any other questions at all? Yes, of course.
And I would always say to yourself, Councillor Jeffreys, that if you think there's a problem or you feel there's a problem, you need to tell people to report it to the police on their website, because that comes back to the evidence where my officers meet with the police. But just to go away from this, this was purposely launched in Basildon first because we had the trial e-scooters, and it just, the young people took the view, well, if you can get a trial e-scooter, they've got to be okay, they've got to be fine. It's a bit like a teacher in a secondary school being seen by the sixth formers smoking. Well, if teachers smoking, I can smoke. Well, that's why teachers are not allowed to smoke on the school grounds. So no sixth formers see bad habits. And that's why we've gone for Basildon first. One, to resolve the problem that was created, and two, to learn lessons. Because you wouldn't want us to go with our Dr. Martens on around Wickford and Billericay and upset your constituents when we need to go in there with ballet shoes on, do that level of education, give people fair warning, because they're a lot of money, and if that doesn't sink in and they're being blasé, then fine, you're fair game. Fines and your vehicle gets seized and crushed.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that note about there are a lot of money, and I don't disagree with you, my concern is all it needs is one of these e-scooters to hit somebody, and they have in the past. They've got no insurance, yeah, and that person is injured. Let's say, for example, a broken leg. You know, is that right? I'm sorry. Go on.
To answer your question, absolutely not. But I hope you appreciate the fact where the worst area was Basildon, because we had the trial scooters, that had to be first. And we've learnt things from this. And we're going to get this, we've got this pretty much right, how we've introduced it.
We have.
So then we're going to work on the evidence, we're going to work on the public space protection orders. Very happy, we've got the teams in Wickford. If we need to have a day in Billericay, liaising with your town councils and the ward members, not a problem. But there's no point us perpetually enforcing something when we've resolved it in Basildon. We've got to be able to enforce it in other areas, and that will include Pitsea as well.
Councillor Jeffreys.
Yeah, thank you to Councillor Smith. It was more so that as we're scrutinising, it's just making sure that it's sort of laid out properly, and obviously the timescales, particularly for when the rollout comes through, because the bid rangers are technically not the bid rangers per se. They're actually wardens funded by the town council with Roger Hurst. So it may have the nice sticker, but it's the town council that partially fund them. And I think it's sort of fine to say we'll work with them, but if we have our own resources, it's making sure that they're actually all linked in together, plus with the CCTV coming in. So I think that was just merely from my point is, when do we expect to see them in Wickford? Obviously, if we're learning lessons here, don't have a problem with that. It's just obviously when can we see that coming forward? Because obviously it's important to remember that sort of when I would cycle around the Wickford and sometimes into Basildon around Eastmain, you'd see the e-scooters that from the trial dumped as soon as they get to the cut-off. And I think we still have the thing of people will migrate from Wickford to Basildon and back. So it's just the catching thing of they may be seen here, but then they're originating from either Wickford, Billericay or Pitsea or Langdon. So sometimes we have to sort of zoom out and think they may be going through, but they may be originating from somewhere else.
Before I go over to my officer Julie Long, we don't enforce with CCTV because you'll understand there's no number plates. and a lot of them this time you pull the hood over, and if they're outside the town centre with face covering, so it's better to have a physical person there to stop them or approach them when they've stopped. But I'll hand over to Julie to answer your technical questions.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Ultimately, just to offer some reassurance, the riding of the scooter still remains an offence, regardless of the public space protection order prohibitions. That still very much remains an offence. The public space protection order gives the ability to delegate authority for the fixed penalty notices. With regards to it being an offence riding of an e-scooter, that still remains an offence in itself, if that makes sense. It just offers an additional tool to be able to enforce it. So it offers an additional tool to council officers, people with delegated authority, to be able to issue a fine in a bid to prohibit that behaviour. But very much, if there are, well, forgive me, because when I mentioned the bid ranges, etc., I was more referring to them providing us with intelligence with regards to issues, maybe rather than enforcing. But I think very much within Wickford, and I've had some recent conversations about this, it's about us joining up the resources there that we already have within the town. As you've mentioned, the CCTV is undergoing huge improvements. And whereas it may be difficult to use that to retrospectively enforce, there are opportunities for us to identify individuals potentially with our police community support officers in particular who've got a great local knowledge there, and visiting those individuals with regards to warnings concerning their conduct, etc. So we're very much open to extending the PSPO within that area, but it would have to be based on current tangible evidence ultimately. But we can go away and explore what we've got in that regard for sure.
Just one more. So what we need to do is get the public space protection order. Well, it might be helpful if I ask Julie the question again to all members. Can you? So how do we extend or amend the public space protection order for Billericay Town and Wickford Town, so that what we're doing in Basildon Town Centre, we can do in Billericay and Wickford? Because respect to Councillor Mordecai and Councillor Jeffries, it's the first time I've had requests from Billericay and Wickford for this purge on e-scooters. We're very happy to engage because I think they're death traps.
Yeah, apologies. Ultimately, the public space protection order, like I said, is evidence-based. So if we can obtain evidence with regards to there being particular issues concerning the use of e-scooters in Billericay and Wickford, then we can certainly propose a variation to the order. But what I would suggest is there would need to be, the benefits to that are in existence if you have officers that have the delegated authority to take the appropriate action, because otherwise what you run the risk of doing is you extend it to that area, and if you've not given delegated authority, for example, to your rangers or your bid rangers, etc., then we run the risk that the public space protection order loses its credence with regards to being effective. So ultimately it will be evidence-based, but we have a daily tasking briefing with our police colleagues. We're also setting up a focus group, particularly around Wickford. So what we will do as part of that is I'll add it as an agenda item and assess what evidence we've got to support it. But what we need to be able to do is if we extend it, we need to then be able to enforce it. Otherwise we're extending the public space protection order and we haven't necessarily got the support of the officers there to carry out the enforcement.
So just to clarify, Julie, and for the benefit of the Billericay and Wickford members here, Wickford's going to be the easiest one to do because they've got their bid ranges in place. So once they've got the delegated authority, once we've amended the PSPO, subject to evidence, we can get cracking with Wickford pretty quickly. So let's make that the next priority, because that's the easiest one to deal with. With regards to Billericay, I am sure. Can I just ask a question to Councillor Mordecai through the chair?
More school holidays, that's the time you're going to have it. Half-term holidays, that sort of stuff. particularly down the high street. I've seen it a few times, but it is predominantly on it. And it's not just the e-scooters, to be honest with you, it's the electric bikes. Yeah, no lights. I nearly got hit myself the other day, literally coming up the high street in my car, and a bike came down with no lights in the middle of the road. One of these electric bikes. But predominantly school holidays is a good sign with it. Ran by the railway station. Yeah. But I take your point about it needs to be reported. I don't take that. Yeah, I do take your point about it does need to be reported and the police need to be aware because it's evidence-based policing. I understand that.
Mustn't forget Pitsea. What's the public space protection covering order there for the town centre?
It's not e-scooters within the town centre currently, it's Basildon Town Centre, which was varied in March of this year. So, like I say, it still remains an offence. It is still an offence, just because it's not assigned within the order itself. The usage is still an offence. It's just that there isn't the option to enforce the PSPO, essentially. So the use is still an offence. It's just that it's not within a designated area. For example, Basildon Town Centre, where we actually had quite a lot of reports of some quite serious injuries, actually, of people becoming quite seriously hurt with regard to being struck by the scooters, etc. So again, that was used as evidence to propose a variation of the order, and that was accepted and agreed. And then we go through a period of education, and then we start enforcing, which is why you will see that there's been quite an increase in enforcement, and we've done purges with regards to seizures as well. And it's not to say that what we couldn't do, and we have. Sorry, I think we're sharing one microphone now, aren't we? Right, when there are particular issues. You mentioned the school holidays. There's nothing to say that we couldn't do a particular campaign around the school holidays and utilise some existing resources that we have. You may have seen that Councillor Smith presented at Cabinet. We utilised some existing resources to tackle the illegal use of fireworks recently. So we did that as a bit of a campaign. It didn't need to be a long-term thing. Similarly to the school holidays, it may be that we would tackle it in that short period and it would be enough to resolve the issue. So they're all things that we can look at going forward with regards to resolving the antisocial behaviour.
Does that, through the chair, answer your questions about what to do in Billericay and Wickford?
Yeah, thanks very much. Just one quick question I'll get my head around it. Where you got a PSPO then, who does that delegate the powers to enforce section 143 and section 165 then?
Yeah, the delegated authority, yes, absolutely. So that would be, there is still no seizure. Council officers can't seize, but what they can do is issue a fixed penalty notice to an individual that is of an eligible age that they would be able to pay, that they're legally able to pay the fine. So ultimately, the rest of the responsibility still very much lies within our police colleagues. So they are still very much responsible for tackling this as an issue. It's still very much a criminal offence, as Councillor Smith mentioned during his opening speech, that they should be tackling. This is just an additional tool for us to use as local authority to tackle the behaviour. Is that clear? Forgive me. Thank you.
So if it's okay, Mr. Jim, so just to wrap up, Julie Long is going to liaise with the officers in Wickford to get Wickford up and running first, because we have that resource, but we'd have to amend that public space protection order so we can really grow a pair of fangs and get to grips with it. In the meantime, with Billericay, we could do some education, get some notices up in the shops, because I'm sure people in Billericay wouldn't want to spend hundreds of pounds on a kid's scooter to have it seized. And someone riding around the police HQ in Springfield testing it. Can we do that in the schools as well?
Certainly.
Yeah, so that's where we're going to start. But with regards to Pitsea, we've got two members here from Pitsea tonight. What are your thoughts? Should it just be the town centre, the train station? Would that be sufficient?
I'll be truthfully honest. I think e-scooters, in an ideal world, should be banned full stop, or like Councillor Reid said, to have driving licences, but we can't do that at a local government sort of position. I think mainly for the town centre in Pitsea. I think it gets really bad, especially during the markets as well, when obviously there's more pedestrians on the paths. It's an absolute accident and a nightmare waiting to happen to our residents. Did you want to say anything on that, Councillor Reid?
No, I totally agree with you, but I think that in Pitsea itself, they might start in the town centre, but then they go round all the parks. They go round the Legacy Park, they go round Northlands Park, they go round Eversley, and so unless we stop them in the school holidays, they just do a route, and they do it all day and into the evenings, and so the town centre isn't just the problem in Pitsea. I mean, they have a loop that you'll hear them, you know, going round and round.
So, listening to members, you'd be happy with the town centre where there's people shopping, but where people, because they're on a low income, are using it just to get to A to B, carry on with our policy of just sticking to the town centres.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this issue, I mean, I can understand the PSPOs being enforced within the town centres, that's fine. But as Councillor Reid has already pointed out, it's an extensive thing. You know, it carries on throughout our estates. And I can testify with Langdon particularly. I mean, you mentioned earlier it's not actually a town centre as yet, but it is obviously in formation. But we still have a problem with these scooters, and it's throughout the estates, and they travel around, and they don't start in one place and stay in one area. They just carry across the whole district. And we've already had quite a bad accident with an 11-year-old boy actually in Nicholas Lane fairly recently, in regards to that, where the police were called. So these things are still happening elsewhere, and that's my concern really. And I think really it is something I think that needs to be regulated really. I mean, these are dangerous vehicles, same as any other vehicle. You know, if it's not driven properly and responsibly, you know, it's a dangerous vehicle in the wrong hands. And I think this is what we're seeing. You know, sporadically we're seeing things happening throughout the borough on estates, not necessarily in the town centres. But I understand we need to start somewhere. But somehow we need to broaden that remit. I don't know quite how we do that at this stage. I understand obviously through the you know, legal processes the police can get involved, but usually the police get involved when something bad happens rather than you know, an enforcement position. So yeah, I don't know if it's something that can be kind of thought about as we take the discussions on PSPOs forward.
I'm just going to lead on there from Councillor Webb. Obviously, you asked myself and Councillor Reid what we would like for Pitsea. Is there a chance maybe we could invite you back to one of these meetings, give you a bit more time and us time to have a bit more of a mulch over about what we ideally want in Pitsea, Langdon, and then maybe next time you come back as well, we could have an update on Wickford and Billericay, and so on and so forth. So maybe pushing aside, maybe not making rash decisions, but we can go back, have an in-depth conversation with our other Pitsea councillors, and then maybe at the next meeting after Christmas, we could sit down and discuss further.
I have an idea. It's an old chestnut, a working group. So, and it's down to yourself, Mr. Chairman, and the committee to approve. But if you made it a 6-member, one for Wickford, one for Billericay, one for Langdon, one for Pitsea, one for Vange, and a spare one just to make up the numbers, because you know what it's like. Someone will say there's a big problem, say Noak Bridge or elsewhere, and you get all sorts of emails. So if you go for a 5 or 6, but at least 5 of them come from the 5 towns. It's only after 8 I've got a problem, so we're okay for a bit. You can grill me as much as you like, but I know we're not, with respect, when officers do presentation, you get the glazed eye syndrome and you're just like, yeah, skip.
I have that effect.
But also, as Julie Long suggested, there are the area committees, but sometimes the area committees might not work because Langdon is split across 2 area committees. One I chair, one Councillor Webb chairs. Same with Basildon. Kingswood one side of the town centre, which is mine. The other side is chaired by Councillor Ansell. At least with Wickford, Pitsea and Billericay, they've all got the same area committee. But I'm very happy to come back here, but I do think a working group purposely focused on this one issue of myself there and Julie Long, and then that way there are things we can talk about operationally and other such matters. So each of the political groups, where the Conservatives, for example, have most of their councillors in Billericay, it would be easy to have an adequate Billericay representative. With Wickford, I'm sure Councillor Jeffreys and the Wickford Independents could find a suitable person to voice Wickford's view on this one. Pitsea's easy enough. And the other town centres we can resolve. So that's why I think the 5 town centres, the 5 towns, and a spare one. And then we can make ad hoc. So rather than wait for another scrutiny meeting to come forward, I've got all the time in the world to come here, no problem at all. But I think with a working group we can make ad hoc. So if Judy says we need to make this minor adjustment, or we need to collect evidence here, or we need to consult members before we go out to consultation, with a working group, they're an ad hoc body to deal with the business required. But we'd have to meet first, probably just after Christmas. So the 5 towns being represented and probably a spare one for political proportionality, yada. Can give the direct steer that you want to myself and Julie Long, and we'll do what needs to be done and come back to the working group. I think that's the way. But Mr. Chairman, you'd have to propose that, get a seconder, choose your words and put it to the vote.
Members, thank you very much for being patient with me. Obviously, because of the severity of the e-scooters, I think tonight we should take a vote on setting up a working group made up of 6 members to discuss and keep track of developments with regards to e-scooter usage within the borough. All those in favour? Perfect, that's unanimous. Thank you.
Do you want to mention it's 5 towns plus a spare must be represented?
Just for clarification, this will be for the 5 towns to be represented plus an extra to oversee and also put in their ideas.
Political proportionality covers it all.
Perfect, amazing. And is there any other questions for Councillor Smith at all, members? No? Of course.
As I say, when we started on this, the complaints were around Basildon Town Centre because we're working really hard. If you've seen the success of the Eastgate recently, all the new businesses coming in, there's going to be that private medical place. How could you have someone coming out of day surgery for, say, a cataracts, thinking, am I going to get whacked over by a scooter pedalling through, well, speeding through the town centre? So this is where we started at, to make the town centre pedestrian friendly again. This has been very helpful, very constructive tonight. We have this working group and we'll be able to take this quickly as possible and meet as ad hoc. And the 5 towns being representative will be like ambassadors for their town to say that we'd rather you prioritise, say, more on Langdon train station, you know, during the school holidays, for example, or when George Jeffreys had his birthday and he's got a new scooter, you've got to grab his, seize him and find him. You know, that's what this is about. So it's not just to meet for the sake of meeting, but to feed back to me and Julie Long, and then that way we can take the fastest action possible. And also, because it is minuted and everything else, that is evidence again for the PSPO, and we can ask the borough commander to attend or his delegate and make that representation. Because we're all sure the police have far more important things to do. Some people may think it's trivial, someone riding around in a scooter, but when you see these terrible, tragic accidents, and you think for that brief, swift, sharp intervention, that person would still be here today. That's what this is about. Thank you, members. Right, I shall disappear and do some stuff for my niece.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith and Julie as well. Thank you so much for that information. We will now move on to item number 5, which is the corporate enforcement policy. And now we shall go over to James.
Thank you, Chair. So the update on the development of the corporate enforcement policy follows on to from the item I presented at the last Environment and Enforcement Scrutiny meeting. And last time I came to members with a bit of a background around what we do in terms of enforcement, our approach to it, the existing corporate enforcement policy, and suggested a pathway which was challenged, feedback was provided, and ultimately endorsed to take forward. So what you've got in front of you tonight is the first draft of the revised corporate enforcement policy for comment, question and for feedback for me to take back to the Cabinet member for consideration. The key changes are an update in terms of the legislation that we're operating under. There are new things in there around the things that we highlighted last time that were missing from the previous corporate enforcement policy. But the fundamental change is a change in language and approach. It's much more resident focused and talks about the impact that our enforcement activity has on residents. So it's talking about, rather than being one around a stick, it's talking about the positive impact that enforcement has on the majority of our residents in terms of positive outcomes there. The version that you see in front of you, we, subject to endorsement as it develops, we will get it designed. We're aiming to get some testimony and feedback from people who've been through, have seen the results of our enforcement activities, whether they are residents who've seen improvements to their neighbourhoods through removal of e-scooters, whether they've seen improvements in terms of what we've done around HMO housing and houses of multiple occupation, or whether we've seen fly tipping being cleared up and enforcement action taken against the resident as a result of that. So what we're aiming to do is make that very human and talk about the experiences for the majority of our residents who do the right thing and to talk about the impact that our enforcement approach has towards keeping the environment and neighbourhoods clean and tidy and pleasant to live in. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you so much, James. Have we got any questions for James at all? Councillor Mordecai.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for doing this. I've had a good read of it. There's just a couple of points. On page 24, right at the bottom, we talk about if the issue isn't resolved and further action is needed, we may issue a formal enforcement notice. I would prefer to be firmer on that, because if you've gone through the step process you've talked about, and I understand that, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. Yeah, we're sort of wishy-washy about it. We're either going to do it or we're not going to do it, because you're going to have people that think, oh, you might take me to court. Well, let's chance my arm. And page 26, we talk about the CPS standards, but we don't mention the CPS standards in terms of the victim's right to have a review, the decision that we make. So if we've made a decision, let's say, for example, like somebody fly tips in front of Councillor Westwick's house, we know who the suspect is, we have all the information and everything, but we take a decision not to prosecute that person. What right does Councillor Westwick have to appeal that decision under the CPS standards? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mordecai. So I think that the first one was one that we were toing and froing on, because exactly the point that you raised there, so I'm glad you picked up on that. The thing that we settled on was we wanted to give ourselves the ability to apply public interest tests and proportionality in line with the codes of practice as early on in the process as possible. But that is something that we were looking at in terms of the wording there. But I do like the feedback around Crown prosecutions, and I will take both of those points back and feed them back to the Cabinet member as part of this. So thank you, Chair. Thank you.
And the final question is, do we have the resources to do all this?
I think in terms of the substance of the what's in there currently, this covers a multitude here, and I think that what we were talking about in the previous item is we have to have the ability to be able to flex and adapt towards what the priorities are for the borough at the time. So it's something I work closely on with my colleagues across CLT to make sure that we've got our resources in the right place at the right time to be able to focus on certain areas. Definitely we can't spread ourselves across everything all the time, and we need to make sure that we're concentrating on the things that are going to have the most impact on the matters that are facing our residents. And but what we do is this is being done collaboratively across the whole of the council. So this is bringing together all of our resources and saying, how do we solve each problem in the most appropriate way, the most proportionate way, and what tools have we got at our disposal, whether they are through environmental enforcement, antisocial behaviour, whether they're through partnerships with the police and so on, or whether that is through planning legislation or environmental health teams. The whole point of the what we've got here is this is corporate enforcement policy. This is the approach the whole council takes, and underneath that there is governance in terms of how we deploy our resources and how we allocate them to the priorities of the borough.
Through you, Chair, I'd just like to thank Mr. Hendry for the amount of work that he's done in this, and I do appreciate it and his answers. Thank you.
Is there any other questions for James at all? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on one point in particular is how, I've got a few questions. One in particular is, how does the council actually measure whether the enforcement is being applied consistently across all of the listed service areas in the report?
Thank you, Councillor. So we do have performance indicators that are reported by service and function. They do go through an operational group and a steering group as well on a strategic level to look at that. We are in the process of redesigning that and getting those performance indicators in a much smarter way. Speaking from experience for the functions that I look after within my team, we have to go chasing for that information, and it can be quite slow to get that information out. So we're trying to find ways of pulling that information out of the system in a much more kind of timely manner, so we can get real-time performance information out. So my team certainly have to go looking for it and taking their time away from doing frontline services, that those things can be pulled out more intuitively and through things like Power BI and having that visibility in those dashboards. And that's something that I hope we get better at. We've started to roll that out in some areas. It's not everywhere yet, but it is starting to come through.
Thanks, James. The other one I'm actually interested in is on the transparency side. So, will anonymised enforcement data such as warnings, FPNs, and prosecutions be published, and at what frequency would they be published? And just the second part of that, I think it's actually quite important. How will a potential conflict of interest be documented when the council itself is actually the subject of said enforcement?
I'm not sure about the latter part there. I'd have to refer to colleagues a bit more learned than me in this area. But in terms of performance visibility, at the last meeting, I presented quite a lot of numbers in terms of performance. That was anonymised. That talks about prosecutions, fixed penalty notices, where we'd taken action against people. And I think that this committee is probably the appropriate function to challenge and scrutinise performance in this space. So that's something that members were minded to review in future. As I did before, it'd be appropriate, I think, for this committee to scrutinise performance, particularly around the areas which are covered within this policy.
Thanks. It was more so the data being published. I remember when we had the fly tipping issue, and the cabinet member referred to that. He'd published it was Councillor Baker who was standing in for Councillor Webb. We were saying that we needed more data on the fly tipping, and I was referred to the cabinet report. And when I actually checked, it wasn't the information that I was described at the meeting, which is obviously a point in terms of the data. And I think it's better to have it published as a sort of a dashboard. It's going back to Cameron days, but Steve Hilton was always very much of publishing the data because sunlight is the best detergent for this sort of thing. So at least residents can see, is it working? What's the actual yearly thing? And plus, if someone wants to check it all. And just picking up on something Councillor Mordecai said, has the council actually assessed whether it has the officer capacity and the actual expertise to implement the extended policy scope?
I think that the policy itself covers all of the functions that deliver enforcement across the council. So, as I mentioned before, there's the opportunity for us to flex and redirect around that. There's nothing in here that the council isn't already performing, so it does bring that together under one umbrella. What the recommendation would be is that once we've got the corporate and overarching policy, then the departmental stuff would need to come underneath that as well. So the individual approaches to each of the enforcement threads would need to then follow underneath that, but then talk to the overarching policy, which is obviously what's in front of you today.
Is that answered your questions there, Councillor Jeffries? Perfect. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point of clarification, really. It mentions around fly tipping, a high proportion of reports not found on inspection due to duplicate reports. I just wondered what is being done to make that more efficient.
Thank you, Councillor. So, following on from the work that we've done on in-cab services for waste and recycling services, we are looking at how we may roll those services out to wider neighbourhood services as well. So, there are essentially things that you can do in terms of arming our crews up to give them better real-time information and not having to be reliant on paper. What we're finding at the moment is there is a bit of a lag between what's reported through the system, and that ends up in the hands of the operatives undertaking the work on the ground. Sometimes they may not be getting the pictures, the visibility of what was reported through. It might come through against your home address rather than where the location is, and that then leads to issues. And what we are finding as well is you do get duplicate reports as well. So if one report's made at a slightly different time, it might have missed that print run rather than being put together. So we're at the process at the moment where we are redesigning our end-to-end processes and saying, okay, where do we overlay the digital intelligence to give our operatives the best chance of finding that and resolving that in the field. So there's lots of work going on behind the scenes at the moment to develop that.
Is there any other questions to James at all? No, James, I'd just like to obviously thank you very much for a detailed report. It's massively appreciated. We will now move on to item number 6. Sorry, I'm a bit out of sync because I've changed around the numbers. Where we will be discussing the cemetery review. So over to James. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So what you have in front of you tonight, members, is a proposal for the way in which we will be reviewing our cemetery regulations for reference. They were last published and adopted in 2011, so they are overdue a refresh here. And what I'm proposing is that we amalgamate the cemetery regulations alongside the memorials policy, so they become one combined thing. It takes place in the same department of my teams. It is something that is undertaken by the same officers in many an instance, and it's one where the work that we've done with other authorities show that a combined policy and approach and can help support residents at the most sensitive time when they're engaging with their council and they just want things to work. They just want to make sure that the burial or the ashes interment takes place smoothly. They've got plenty more things to worry about, and if they are purchasing and installing a bench or a memorial in one of our country parks or somewhere else within the borough, then they have a smooth process that just works. And I've included Thurrock's on here as an example of where those two policies have been combined into one. We are currently talking to a number of other authorities up and down the country about what's working for them, where they've updated since 2011, what we need to be taking on board, learning lessons from there. And I think that the ask of members tonight is to endorse the approach that's taking place, and just in terms of wanting to formally engage with community and faith groups around making sure that we've got things right for the next 15 years. And my intention would be, once we've done that engagement piece, to then bring something back to this committee to then say, have we got the regulations in the right place? Do we feel that they're appropriate? Do you feel that we've sufficiently taken on board the advice of our community, faith groups, undertakers and so on? Are they in the right place so we can make sure that we've got the right things in place for our teams moving forward? Within the report as well, we detail where we've made some changes to the way that we approach things. Our teams are very good at being sympathetic and looking to support the needs of our community at a difficult time in their lives and in their families' lives. And it's just about shoring that up and making sure that we've got the right approach moving forward for the next, hopefully, the next 10, 15 years. It might be me sitting in this chair, it might be somebody else. I don't know, I'll be completely grey by that point, I think, but well on the way towards that already. Hopefully not in need of a cemetery space. I've got a few more years left in me yet. But I think that this is something that just to give credit to the team, our cemeteries team and the administrative support that's provided to our residents is highly regarded. We work really well with local undertakers. I think it's a good opportunity to flag up the good work that our teams do for, like I say, families who are facing that difficult time in their lives. And really all I'm looking for members tonight is an endorsement to formally go out and engage with community and faith groups just to update the regulations and make sure that my teams are doing that in a sympathetic way and listening. But I do imagine there'll be a chance to bring that back for further scrutiny, just to make sure that the officers have got the right line on this before we then take that revised regulations to Cabinet for adoption. There's no rush on this. The team are supporting all of the applications we get, and this is about firming things up for them, so we make sure we do that in a safe way, in a sympathetic way, and a way that really supports our community. So thank you.
Safe to say, James, I think you're going to be at Basildon Council for the next 50 years, so we're very happy to have you in that chair. Members, is there any questions to James at all on that? No? Perfect. James, would you like us to take a vote or anything for you to be able to go out at all into the public domain with this, or...?
So I think, Chair, the recommendation is to provide scrutiny on the work undertaken to date and endorsement for the next steps outlined for formal engagement on revised cemeteries regulations for Basildon Borough. So there's no need for a formal vote on that, but if I have members' endorsement for that, there will be an opportunity to bring that back in future, as I say, in a formal draft format.
Thank you very much, James. I think I can speak on behalf of all the members that we would happily endorse that. So, James, thank you very much for bringing that forward tonight. We will now move on to item number 7, which is dog fouling. So I will pass that over to James.
Thank you, Chairman. So, looking forward to this. We keep us straight. I did say to somebody earlier, I said, I've got work tonight. They said, what are you doing at work? And I explained, and they were like, what do you do for a living? Dog fouling, as you can see that's outlined within the report, is something which we can joke about, we can laugh about, but it can be, it is dangerous, particularly for youngsters. So it's something that the vast majority of people who own a dog look after a dog, and we saw some real changes in COVID, in lockdown. A lot of people got dogs, and we saw a bit of an increase in where the routes that people were taking to walk their dogs and so on as people's lifestyles changed. And dogs are an important part of our lives, aren't they? And I think, like I said, the majority of people do the right thing with dog waste, and the report that's presented to members tonight is around what powers the council has to act upon those who are less responsible. So previously, Basildon Council had a dog control order that was enacted under the Cleaner Neighbourhoods and Environment Act 2005, and within that there were certain prescribed powers that the council could adopt. The power that Basildon adopted was the requirement to clear up after a dog. And there were other powers that could have been adopted at that point in terms of letting a dog off a lead, allowing a dog onto land from which dogs are banned, and walking more than a set number of dogs. But those powers were never formally adopted within Basildon because there wasn't a demonstrable issue to be put in place there. So we've spoken a lot about public space protection orders today, and a change in legislation meant that clearing up after dogs automatically moved over into a public space protection order, subject to the same considerations that we've flagged up today around evidence-based proportionality and so on. So there is not currently within our current public space protection order or the draft one that's being circulated at the moment, there's no powers in there around dog fouling and the requirement to clean up after a dog. But what we do have as a condition under Section 87 of the Environmental Protection Act, which is a general littering one, there is a requirement there to clear up, any litter or to not drop litter. That includes dog fowl, and there has been a case precedent around that. So I think that in terms of the level of impact that we get across the borough, the vast majority, we're talking 99.9% of dog owners clean up after themselves. The level of casework that comes into my team around dog mess is not high at the moment. We aren't getting those calls in, but we do have a lot of litter and dog bins across the borough. There are plans in place at the moment to upgrade some of those. The first of those upgrades has already started taking place, but there is we are procuring a load more replacement bins at the moment for existing bins. There are some, on page 77, there are some indicative powers that other authorities have adopted under PSPOs around dog fouling, but again, they'll be subject to the tests which are at the bottom of page 76 and the top of page 77. So again, they would need to be evidenced in terms of the frequency, the likelihood, the location, and the demonstrable impact. It's not a pleasant thing to talk about, but it's an important thing that local authorities can do to keep their areas clean. But obviously, I would encourage anybody who does walk a dog, make sure you've got your poop bags on you, make sure you're clearing up after your dog. It's part of the conditions of owning a dog, isn't it? You have to make sure that you're ready to clear up their mess when they do it. So I'm open for any questions from members tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. I'll go over to Councillor Mordecai first. I'll go over to Councillor Reid first. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Not so much a question, but it's on page 78 where it says public awareness campaigns, e.g. any bin will do. And I do think that a lot of residents that contact me that say there's not enough dog poo bins, and so therefore that stops them clearing it up. It's almost to me like an excuse, but it is the fact that they can use any waste bin to put it in. And so I think that we need to really educate the public that if there's not a dog poo bin near where your dog has fouled, or if the bin is full, you don't have to just leave it on the ground. You can take it and put it into another bin.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, Councillor Reid. You're absolutely correct. We have about 1,700 litter and dog bins across the borough. You should never be too far away from one, and they're all serviced by our street cleansing teams. You can use a dog bin, you can use a normal litter bin. We don't mind as long as you use a bin, and I take on board your point around communications. I think that, to your point, most people do the right thing and they'll hold on to it until they find a litter bin. That's something that we'd encourage, and if there's a way of communicating that out to residents, I'm all for that. Thank you.
Councillor Mordecai.
Thank you, Chair. You covered off part of what I wanted to talk about there. It is about the number of, it's the frequency of emptying. My biggest complaint that I get from residents is they want to do the right thing, but the bins are full. I mean, I've got a picture here for Grange Road, Mill Road. I'm only going back to September, and it's all on the floor there, but it shouldn't be, because probably people don't know that they can just dump it in any other bin. But the other thing that I do get an issue with is when I've reported stuff and it comes back and says that litter, that poo bin, is part of, for argument's sake, Guinness Trust. What enforcement do we do with Guinness Trust to get them to enter? If people want to do the right thing and put it where it should go, but the bin's not on our land owned by us, what enforcement do we do to that?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think that this does tie into some of the things that we're looking at in terms of the what we're calling the in-cab technology, but we're looking at things like potentially rolling out bin sensors and things like that. So we could actually, what I'd like to do is get the data from our teams to know the frequency they're going in, is that right, and how full's the bin when they get there. Are we getting there too early? Are we waiting until it's, you know, overflowing before we're collecting? And that gets us into a much smarter place than we are currently, which is on a collection round, and it relies on us changing that collection round. But what that does mean is if I've got to move somebody there to collect that, I've got to move them from somewhere else in the borough. So I have got to make sure I move the teams to the right place, and that's fine. That's all in the day's work for what we do. But I'd love to not have any wasted journeys for my cleansing team. I don't want them driving to empty a bin that's a quarter full. I want them driving to empty a bin that's 3/4 full. And you know, if that saves them a trip, then that means that I can deploy them in other places where they're more needed. Where the bins are on private land, we're able to speak to the landowners. There are things we can do in terms of litter prevention orders, and often a visit from one of our enforcement team and a bit of a communications activity normally resolves it. But there are things that we can do to formally serve notice under duty of care issues or litter clearance orders and so on to make sure that is something that they've got under control. So there are things that we can do.
Is there any other questions for James at all, members? Councillor Jeffreys.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's important to have the public awareness campaign, and I think my colleague, he seems to keep speaking first, so he's taking one very good point actually about the frequency of the bins. And I know I've raised this with you, James, in the past, but there seems to be a problem in the system that residents will not sort of leave it and take it home. They will just continue to pile it up. And what happens is it's reasonable for you to say, well, we want it when it's 3/4 full, but sometimes you've got 2 bins worth because there's obviously an issue in the system. And if there is a holiday or there's staff sickness, there needs to be probably some better planning around that, because if with dog fanning, some residents will think, well, because it's not being emptied, that's an excuse for me not to deal with it. And obviously because of the sickness, particularly in our country park on the Wick, it's across most of the footpaths. So I think, if possible, just the one thing we can take back from this is there has to be a better review and a better grip on actually the frequency, because we can say, we want to have the PSPOs and things, but we're not doing our side of the bargain in making sure everything's emptied properly. And I know you share that concern. So it's just, what are your plans going forward to make sure that we're not having bins, as Councillor Mordecai has shared in Billericay, but the same in Wickford. I was notified today in one of the local parks at the top of Elder Avenue, the bin was overflowing, but that should be done because all the bins elsewhere were empty. And that's, do you see what I mean?
Thanks, Councillor. So I think that the way that our cleansing teams work is they are all allocated to neighbourhood supervisors, and what the neighbourhood supervisors will do is if they do have sickness absence, they will move things around within their teams to cover the most important things. So for me, that is around emptying litter bins and making sure that if nothing else is done, then the litter bins are emptied for the day that are due to be emptied. Now, that doesn't mean that on the odd occasion there may be a team member off and a litter bin may be missed because somebody might be covering that route and they're not familiar with it. That's where things like the technology comes into it, because you've got much better geolocation and you've got that information going straight into the crew, so they know they've got to check them. That's the role of the neighbourhood supervisors, to be out there on the ground checking them as well. So the majority of the time it works. The number of complaints we get are low, but any overflowing litter bin that might cause and exacerbate that problem or might legitimise further dumping next to the bin is a problem. I think that we've seen, particularly what's reported back to me from cleansing teams, is we have quite a fair bit of the bins being used for small amounts of household waste or bags originating from shops. Our enforcement teams have done some engagement with commercial premises around that to make sure they've got the right outlet for their commercial waste, that they aren't using our on-street litter bins. You can imagine if you're starting to put your commercial waste into those bins, they can get full up quite quickly. So I guess what I'm probably saying is that the neighbourhood teams, the first thing they take care of every day is making sure they've got somebody to cover the litter bins. If nothing else goes out, if they've only got the teams to do that, that's the first job they'll get done, and then everything else they'll do from there. But you know, they are humans. Our cleansing operatives, they do a great job across the borough. Litter bins has to be number one on their list every day.
Thanks, James. It's not that our operatives do amazing work. I'm just saying that we seem to have periods of time where it'll be a few weeks stretch and it'll be very heavily missed. So it'll be missed quite frequently. And I was just wondering, whilst I have you, we're saying about the bins and making sure the information is correct. Has the survey for the bins, so do we actually know where all the bins are? And I wonder if you could say, has it actually concluded?
Yes, so we've got the survey of the bins. We've got a survey of all of the bins across the borough. We've got 1,044 litter bins and 666 specific dog bins. They are dotted and located all across the borough. Yes.
Thanks. So in terms of the technology, surely now that we know where they are, considering how long it took to survey all of the bins, I'm just wondering why there seems to be that issue of missing them. Because, say, I'd assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I was going to do that route, they'd say, well, there's a bin on this road at the top, and just a brief description of, oh, if you go down this alleyway, turn right, it's there. And I just think if we're making sure that the instructions are sometimes clear, because you could have someone say, oh, well, it's over here, and you'll be meandering halfway across the borough to try and find one bin. So is it actually with technology, but are we being clear with actually in the paperwork until we transition to that it's actually accurate for where you're describing these things are?
I think that, yes, with each of the running sheets does have a specific location of where it is. And so that what I would ask is that if you're coming across full litter bins, please report them through to us, because that then helps the neighbourhood supervisors identify if there is an issue with a collection round, or maybe the communication's not clear, or maybe there's a member of staff who thought, you know, this happens where you get the rounds that overlap. If one operative thinks it's on another one's route, or no, that one down the road is that one, and they're missing out on that. These things can happen. They happen very rarely, but where they do happen, please let us know about it. And I say the supervisors do periodic checks of their routes as well. So, you know, we've got people out there checking. They're out there grading against the Environmental Protection Act for litter, for you know, channels, for sweeping, all of those things. So they're out there checking for full litter bins and things like that. But it is only ever a sample, and we can't check every bin. Every bin. We haven't got enough teams to go around and check every bin after it's been emptied. We do trust our teams to do the right thing, and they do the majority of the time. But if there's issues occurring, I want to know about it so we can then make sure we put the improvements in place.
Thank you, James. It's, as I say, it's just stressing that at least the bins I see and hear of, they're essentially always the same bin, and it's since I've entered office. You could probably tell which ones I'm going to talk about. So leaving that to one side, I think it's if they're continuing to happen after a number of years, I'm sure there's probably been some churn through the management structure. So it's just making sure that they know that these are the hot spots that do need addressing. Because sometimes my concern, and that has been reflected back to me, is that they need, if it's literally the same bin all the time, that if something does go wrong, it is missed. And I think it's just being, at least from your level to the neighbourhood supervisor, that actually needs looking at as the sample bin, because that's sort of the key metric that I'll hear about quite quickly.
Thank you, Councillor. So part of what in the last year, since we've moved to a neighbourhood service, one of the reasons behind that was to make sure that there were allocated and named staff that were affixed to the area, so they had regular routes. They got to know the area, they got to know some of the problems. So if those problems are still happening, absolutely right, we need to know about that so we can flag that up with the supervisors, and that can become one of their more regular checks. But the aim of moving to a neighbourhood model was so that we'd have fixed teams, fixed operatives in the area who get to know the problems, who get to know the area, get to know the residents, and really build up that rapport and that consistency in terms of staff deployment on the ground.
Perfect. Thank you very much, James. Is there any other questions from members at all on the subject? Of course, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, fully recognise, I think they will do, that most of our residents, dog owners, are very responsible, and I think that's evidenced by obviously the use of the dog bins that are allocated in different areas, and in some cases are not emptied as frequently as they should and overfill. But there's also the issue of the irresponsible dog owners that don't use dog bins and allow dogs to defecate as well. So, I mean, there's an area of enforcement around that we haven't really addressed, and is that sufficient enough? I mean, there's mention of PSPOs, but I'm not so sure how a PSPO would be kind of relevant in these circumstances. And there's also mention of CPNs, the Community Protection Notices, which are tailored to specific individuals and circumstances. I mean, how could this be implemented, for example, to address those residents that are kind of negligent?
Thank you, Councillor Webb. So what I've outlined within the report are the different tools available to local authorities in terms of enforcing against dog fouling. The main one that we would use would be Section 87 under the Environmental Protection Act, which is the general littering offence. So that's the one that we've adopted. We can use that. The PSPO is one that other local authorities have implemented. They have implemented those clauses, but they would need to meet the criteria that's outlined on the bottom of page 78 and top of page 79. Community protection notices, in my experience, tend to be used in light of what used to be the antisocial behaviour orders, but in a much more positive light, because they talk about things that in the future you must rather than you will not. So it's saying you must clean up after your dog, and if you do not, then there are these are the consequences for that. But they are better targeted at individual property. So if we knew typically under, I think it'd be more like if there was one resident who was allowing their dog to foul on a green open space in front of their house that the kids were also playing on, then the community protection notice and community protection warning are probably more proportionate for those incidences. So they tend to be very, very targeted, demonstrable patterns of behaviour, but isolated incidents rather than general blanket issues. So I think that the EPA allows us to issue anywhere that's open to the air, whether it's our land or not. PSPO has to be demonstrable and proportionate, which is why we've seen on the earlier item that it tends to be ring-fenced to town centres, high streets, parks and so on. Community protection notices are better used, targeted at individuals. I think that's probably where you've got those different avenues available to you. So the Section 87 of the EPA covers the whole of the borough, anywhere that's open to the air, That can be on private land unless the landowner's given that individual permission to undertake that act on their land as well. So there's a few different tools available to us, but Section 87 is the one that we can just, that is already within our gift to use.
Yeah. Thanks, Ms. Andrew. Thanks for the clarification.
And is there any more questions at all? Perfect. Then we will move on to item number 8, which is the work programme that is scheduled in for March 2026. James, did you want me to pass this over to you to talk us through our potential talking points? Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair. So I think that after tonight we may have a further one to add on the cemeteries and burials policy, obviously given the endorsement of committee tonight as well. But there are proposals on the March agenda to invite Essex Police to provide an update on performance around antisocial behaviour, domestic violence, and violence against women and girls, and supporting fly tipping and dumping, and how they're supporting us as part of joint operations with council officers on that. There is a proposal to talk about abandoned and untaxed vehicles and our approach to that and the work that we're doing on that. The town centre security plan, so to consider and comment on the town centre security plan, including the security audit, future opportunities for recycling, so exploring the future of recycling services in the borough and in the context of LGR. Obviously, we'll have a clearer idea by that point, obviously the consultation that's ongoing at the moment. And the team are currently looking at revising the council's tree management policy, so there'll be opportunity in March to provide early input into that process. So there's quite a few things on for March currently. There's quite an ambitious agenda there. There's quite a lot of ground to cover. So thank you, Chair.
Members, are we all happy with the proposal for March? Councillor Reid.
If we're going to set up a task and finish group or working group, when would that be reporting back to the committee?
I think safely to say potentially around about the April mark, obviously to get the to get them together to have their talking points and obviously to feedback to us around April, or maybe I could update members later on, not tonight obviously. Maybe even at the same time in March we could get a bit of feedback from them then. But if James has any ideas on how maybe we could work it, in a sense, if they was to, we set up the task force as such, and then for them to come back to us, could that happen in March as well, to have a bit of a report back from them, or is that a bit too soon?
I think, Chair, maybe a verbal update, but a final report might not be available at that point. It's quite early to say. Obviously, the discussion's only taken place tonight, but I think as a minimum, I think it'd be sensible to put that on the agenda and say, at least to provide an update on progress against the matter that was raised and agreed to tonight.
So with that said, members, if we're happy, that draws the meeting to a close. Thank